I watched my husband die on the lake, only to find him holding another woman's hand. My world shattered twice. The first time was when the yacht belonging to Marco, the love of my life, erupted into a pillar of black smoke in the middle of Lake Como. The second was when I found the photographs. Marco was not dead. He was alive, smiling radiantly beside another family, a life built upon the ashes of mine. He did not leave me an inheritance. He left me a death sentence from the criminal underworld. My grief has turned into a plan for revenge, but the path of vengeance has led me to a truth that is even darker. The real traitor was not my husband, but Ricardo, the devil disguised as a best friend, the one who pulled all the strings. And the hostage he used to control Marco was the very son I believed had died in my arms. My husband thought he had created a widow. He was wrong. He created an enemy, and I will not stop until I burn his entire world to the ground. It was a June afternoon. Marco was wearing a white shirt, the sleeves neatly rolled up, his hair still damp from a shower. He kissed my cheek lightly before walking down to the yacht. "I will be back before dinner," he said, his eyes lingering on me longer than usual. I just nodded. I stood on the shore, watching him step onto the deck. The engine purred evenly as the yacht pulled away from the dock. Just a few minutes later, an explosion tore through the air. A column of fire erupted, followed by thick, black smoke. The smell of burning fuel hit my nostrils, making me choke. People ran toward the pier, shouting for help. I took a few frantic steps and then froze. Before my eyes, the yacht transformed into a heap of red-hot metal, sinking slowly beneath the water. No one jumped out. When the rescue team pulled the first pieces of debris from the water, a police officer approached me, his voice low. "There are no survivors. It was likely a fuel leak. We will continue to investigate." I heard him but did not react. My ears were ringing. My throat was tight. My hands gripped the railing of the pier so tightly they went numb. Marco was dead right before my eyes, only a few hundred meters away. That night, the news spread across the internet. Newspapers published photos of him in a tuxedo, his smile radiant under the spotlight. They called him the golden man of the Italian fashion industry. I read every article, clinging to the memories. But the more I read, the more I felt an invisible distance. I did not leave the house for 4 days. At night, I would lie on my side, facing the empty pillow next to me, where he used to sleep. It was cold and empty. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pillar of smoke rising, then the fire devouring everything. Marco's funeral was held at the Grand Cathedral near the lake. Every seat was filled. I recognized many famous faces from the fashion world, a few politicians, and people I had never met. They came to shake my hand, to hug me, to tell me Marco was a lucky man to have had me. I remained silent. The casket was closed. They explained that his body had been too badly burned to be viewed. I heard them, but a part of my mind still wondered what had really happened on that yacht. When everyone had left, the family lawyer invited me into a side room. He opened a file and read each sentence aloud. All of the assets, the real estate, the company shares, and the executive control of Marco's company were left to me. Everyone said he was so thoughtful, thinking of me until the very end. I nodded. At that moment, I believed it. And I was grateful that amid the loss, I at least had something to hold on to. After the funeral, the house felt so vast that every footstep echoed in the emptiness. I did not eat. I did not sleep. During the day, I would sit for hours in the living room, my eyes fixed on the window but seeing nothing. At night, I would lie still, listening to the clock tick by. Chiara, Marco's sister, practically moved in. She cooked for me, cleaned the house, and answered the calls and messages of condolence on my behalf. At night, she would sleep on the sofa so I would not have to be alone. I knew she was worried, but I could also see the exhaustion in her eyes. That evening, as I sat motionless by the window, Chiara approached. She did not speak at first, just sat down beside me. Her hands were clasped together, nervously twisting the hem of her shirt. After a moment, she sighed. "Sister, I was not planning to tell you, but seeing you like this these past few days, I am afraid you will never recover if you keep thinking of him the way you do." I turned to look at her. She avoided my gaze, took a deep breath, and then said it. Marco had been having an affair for years. The woman was not just a mistress, they had a son together. I was stunned for a few seconds. Then I immediately denied it. I told her not to invent stories about the dead, that she was mistaken. Chiara did not reply, just looked down at her hands. Silence filled the room. I did not ask any more questions, but that entire night I could not sleep. Her words replayed over and over in my head, no matter how hard I tried to push them away. I could not sit still. Part of me wanted to prove Chiara wrong, or at least find evidence to refute her claim, but another part of me needed to know the truth. Marco's office was on the top floor. It was a place I had never been allowed to enter. He always said, "Work is dry, you would be bored." I used to think that was normal, but now, it felt like a door he had intentionally locked against me. I used the spare key. The lock turned easily, but as the door creaked open, the musty smell of old wood and aging paper hit me. The room was dark, with only a narrow sliver of light from the window falling across the large wooden desk in the center. On the desk, his work calendar was still open to the month of June. Beside it were a few fashion sketches, the very drawings I had once proudly shown to my friends. But beneath a stack of papers were thick files, held together by rubber bands. I sat down, pulling the files toward me one by one. My heart was pounding, a mixture of fear and anticipation. I did not know what I was about to find, but I knew one thing: numbers do not lie. I opened each file, my eyes scanning the figures. At first, I only planned to skim, but the more I read, the colder my blood ran. The company's financial reports for the last 4 years all showed consecutive losses. Not just red numbers, but massive, staggering losses. I wondered why I had never heard Marco complain. He had always appeared before me with a smile and stories of new contracts. Then I saw the enormous expenses, with no clear purpose listed: overseas wire transfers, cash payments, loan agreements with unusually high interest rates. Some had the company's seal, but the recipients were all unfamiliar names. My gaze fell upon a steel safe, cold and silent, tucked against the wall. I had never seen it open, but I knew the combination. The irony was cruel. The combination was our wedding date. My fingers trembled as I dialed the numbers, as if they were betraying the memory itself. The safe door clicked open with a dry, metallic sound. Inside, there were not as many papers as I had expected. I pulled out a thin folder, the cover marked with a single word: contract. This was not a will or a property deed. It was a sentence. A loan agreement from an organization whose name alone evoked images of violence and debts that could never be forgotten. The amount was so large that I had to read it 3 times, trying to convince myself I had misread the number of zeros. At the bottom, Marco's signature appeared, clear and neat, like a final, clean cut from a knife. At that moment, I did not know if I was trembling from fear or from the rage that was beginning to boil inside me. I only knew that the world I had built with Marco, its very first brick, had just crumbled into dust. Suspicion was no longer a crack, it was a chasm. My actions were almost instinctive. I contacted a private investigator, a man in his 50s, thin and taciturn, recommended by an old friend. I laid everything I had found on his desk, including the deadly loan agreement. He simply nodded and said he would be in touch. A week later, he called. We met at a secluded cafe on the outskirts of the city. When I arrived, he was already seated in a dark corner, a thick brown paper envelope on the table in front of him. He wasted no words, simply pushing it toward me. My hands were ice cold as I touched the envelope. The first photograph. Marco, the husband I thought was dead, standing there, healthy and tanned. He was wearing a white shirt and sunglasses, his hand holding tightly to the hand of a beautiful young woman. The second photograph, that same woman, holding a little boy who looked to be about 3 years old. And then, the final photograph. It killed me. Marco stood beside them, his hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder, his gaze filled with a tender affection. It was a look of contentment, of a man who had found his true family, a look that I, in all my years as his wife, had never once received. The investigator's voice cut through the silence, deep and emotionless, like a doctor delivering the worst possible news. He is not dead. The explosion on the lake was faked. He has disappeared, and he took a very large sum of money from your company with him. I clutched the photographs. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Everything around me seemed to shrink, leaving only Marco's face in that final picture serene, at peace, as if his marriage to me had never existed. I sat there, stunned, the photos the detective had given me feeling like they were burning my fingertips. In my mind, the perfect play of my life was collapsing piece by piece. The explosion, the funeral, the loving will, the pitying looks from everyone. It had all become a meaningless sham. Are you certain? I tried to keep my voice steady, but it broke at the end. This cannot be. The investigator did not answer immediately. He took a thin file from his briefcase, placed it carefully on the table, and pushed it toward me, as if delivering a final verdict. This is irrefutable proof, madam. Company bank statements, security camera footage from the bank, airline booking records. My hands trembled as I opened the file. The cold numbers danced before my eyes. 4 days before the explosion, Marco had withdrawn an enormous amount of cash from the company's funds. Enough money to buy a new life. He transferred it all to a Swiss account, the investigator continued, his voice firm. The account is under a shell corporation, but the sole beneficiary is Marco. I turned to the next page, a copy of a plane ticket. The passenger's name was completely unfamiliar, but the accompanying passport photo was painfully recognizable. It was Marco, and the flight date was the morning right after that fateful explosion. My throat was dry. My chest felt like it was being crushed. And the woman in the photos? I whispered, the question almost swallowed by the silence in the room. He pulled out another set of photos. Anna Rossi, Marco's longtime mistress. And this child, he said, pointing to a smiling brown-haired boy, is about 3 years old. The DNA results we obtained confirm that Marco is the biological father. I could not breathe. And then the image seared itself into my mind, a cruel film playing on a loop. Marco holding that woman's hand, lovingly bending down to adjust their son's hat. A complete, happy family, of which I was never a part. As if to extinguish the last spark of hope, the investigator added, even Chiara, his sister, did not know about the plan to fake his death. She only thought it was a simple affair. I sat there, motionless. This was no longer betrayal. Betrayal implies that you once meant something to them. This was erasure, a meticulously calculated purge, and I was just collateral damage to be cleaned up. That night I sat alone in the study. What I had inherited was not a fortune. It was a mountain of debt. Debt to criminals, debt to banks, tax debt. Marco's entire empire had, in reality, collapsed long ago. The will had become a bitter joke. He had not left me an opportunity. He had left me a trap. He knew perfectly well that every creditor would come looking for me. And then, the phone began to ring. Unfamiliar male voices, cold and demanding, with only one request. Marco owes us. Now you have to pay. I understood. Marco had not just deceived me. He had turned me into a human shield for his escape. My tears had run dry, and the pain gave way to a cold, chilling silence. In that silence, everything became clear. He had planned it all, the explosion, the will, and the debts. He needed a shield to take the bullets, and he had chosen me. I slowly folded the will, officially ending my role as the grieving wife. He thought I was the prey. He was wrong, because now the hunted would become the hunter. Revenge does not need tears. It needs a plan. I returned to Milan, not as a hunter, but as a vanquished prey. I played the part of a devastated widow, crushed by the weight of debt and willing to do anything to survive. Riccardo took the bait. He presented himself as a benefactor, negotiating with the creditors, but in reality he was controlling every flow of money. He gave me instructions, names to work with, accounts to transfer funds to. He had no idea that every one of his directives was a piece of evidence I was secretly copying and recording. In my role as the puppet running the company, I had access to everything. By day, I was a reluctant, weary, and obedient CEO. By night, I became a spy in my own empire, secretly sending encrypted information to Marco. From Portugal, Marco, the husband the world thought was dead, received that information and turned it into a weapon. He connected with Ricardo's rivals, men who were also looking for a way to overthrow him. A hidden network was forming, and Ricardo, the self-proclaimed puppet master, was being ensnared by his own puppet. When I sent Marco the final piece of evidence, a complete diagram of Ricardo's money laundering pipeline, we knew the time had come. Marco, through an intermediary, sent Ricardo a message. I know what you are doing. I know where you are. And I have enough evidence to burn your entire empire to ash in 24 hours. Give me back my son, or we all go down to hell together. Ricardo was terrified. He agreed to the exchange. The location was an old warehouse at the port of Genoa at midnight. Marco and I were there first, hidden in the shadows. My heart was beating so hard I was afraid Ricardo could hear it. Then he arrived, flanked by 2 bodyguards. And between them, a little boy, about 3 years old, was looking around, bewildered. It was my son, Leo. The moment I saw him, the entire world stopped. This was not the child from the fake photographs. This was my child, in the flesh. Let the boy go. Marco's voice boomed from the darkness, cold and hard as steel. Ricardo signaled for a guard to push Leo toward us. The moment the boy had taken a few steps, the trap was sprung. Headlights from cars parked all around us blazed to life, illuminating the entire warehouse. Ricardo's rivals, tipped off by Marco, had blocked every exit. At the same time, the wail of tactical police sirens grew louder in the distance. Ricardo realized he had been tricked, but it was too late. I burst from the shadows and swept Leo into my arms. The warmth of him, the smell of his hair, it was all real. He cried out in fear, but I knew it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Ricardo and his entire organization were arrested. The empire built on deceit and crime crumbled in a single night. We did not go back to our old life. The villa on Lake Como, the fashion company, the bank accounts, all of it belonged to a past we wanted to bury. We sold everything, paid off all the legitimate debts, and used the remaining money to disappear. 1 year later, we are living in a small white house overlooking the sea on a Greek island. There are no extravagant parties or expensive designer clothes here, only warm sunlight and the sound of the waves. Marco is no longer a powerful businessman. He opened a small wood workshop, where he spends his days building wooden toys for our son. I am no longer an editor or a CEO. I am a mother, spending my days teaching Leo to talk and building sandcastles with him on the beach. Sometimes, Marco will look at me, his eyes still holding a deep remorse, but I just smile and take his hand. We walked through hell together, and now, we have found our own paradise. That afternoon, as the setting sun painted the sea pink, I sat on the porch, watching Marco give Leo a piggyback ride along the sand. The clear sound of my son's laughter echoed, mingling with the waves. Marco's will had once said, "I want you to be the guardian of our dream." He was mistaken. Our dream was not an empire. Our dream, now, is simply family. And finally, it has become real. My first step was to enter Marco's shadowy world myself. I contacted the creditors, the ghosts he had tried to escape. They did not help me out of goodwill. They helped because they wanted their money back, and I gave them a glimmer of hope. But I did not rely solely on them. I followed the money trail myself, the only language Marco truly understood, through international bank transactions. To fund this hunt, I quietly sold everything: the jewelry, the handbags, the symbols of the false life he had built. Every item sold was a piece of the past erased, and a bullet loaded for the future. Before long, I had what I needed: an address, a remote seaside town in Portugal. I arrived in Portugal, prepared for a fiery confrontation. I had imagined myself unmasking the traitor who was living happily with his new family. But what I observed from a distance was completely different. I saw Marco, but he was not happy. He was thin and pale. His eyes were constantly anxious, and he scanned his surroundings like a hunted animal. The woman, Anna Rossi, and the child were always with him, but they did not look like a family. They looked more like his jailers. There were always strange men lingering around their house like guards. One evening, I followed them to a restaurant. As I passed the service counter, I saw Marco discreetly slip the waiter a crumpled napkin. Curious, after they left, I went back and persuaded the waiter to give me the note. Inside, there was only one line, scribbled hastily in Italian. "Help. They have my son." My entire world turned upside down once again. Nothing made sense. What son? Why did he need help? I decided I had to meet him. That night, I created a small electrical short in the neighborhood, causing the streetlights to go out for a few minutes. Using the chaos, I slipped into the backyard of the house. Marco, as I had predicted, came outside to investigate. When he saw me in the darkness, he was not surprised. He simply collapsed. He fell to his knees, and for the first time through all of this, I saw tears on his face. And then, he told me the truth. The person behind everything was not Marco, but Ricardo, the head of the criminal organization that had loaned him the money. He did not just want the money. He wanted to take over our company for his money laundering operations. The explosion was not Marco's plan. It was the escape Ricardo had forced him to follow. Ricardo forced Marco to die so that I would inherit everything, and then he would use the debts to turn me into a puppet to run the company for him. Anna Rossi and the child were just actors hired to create a fake story. "Then the note," I whispered. "Who is your son?" He looked up, his voice broken. "He is our son, Elena. Our son." Ricardo had known I was pregnant. To force Marco to comply with this cruel plan, he had acted first. He had orchestrated the tragedy at the hospital, lying that our son had died at birth. In reality, he had kidnapped him. Marco had to play the part of the traitor, had to let me hate him, to protect the lives of both me and our child. I looked at the man kneeling before me. He was not a traitor. He was a desperate father, a victim, just like me. My revenge now had a new name, Ricardo, and my goal was no longer money. It was to save my son. We would continue this play, but now, both of us knew the script. I would pretend to be subjugated by Ricardo, agreeing to cooperate and become his puppet. From the inside, I would gather evidence of his money laundering network. From the outside, Marco would use that information to connect with Ricardo's rivals. We would create a trap, using Ricardo's entire empire as bait, forcing him to show himself in exchange for his son. This was no longer the revenge of a betrayed woman. This was the war of a mother to get her child back, and this time we would win.